This lecture will focus upon, as you see titled here, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists are the first two political parties in United States history. And so what we're focusing upon with them is their debates in the formation of the United States Constitution, as well as the inclusion of a Bill of Rights. Okay. All right, so the key issue here is ratification of the U.S. Constitution. Ratification means the process of approving or confirming. So at this point, the Constitution has been written, and it is to be determined whether or not it will indeed become the Constitution that governs the United States of America. Okay, so the ratification process begins in September of 1787. There are 9 states required. You may remember a problem with the Articles of Confederation was any major legislation had to be passed unanimously, which hardly ever happens. So the Founding Fathers, in forming the new Constitution, are already trying to fix that problem by stating that we're going to have a strong majority, but we're not going to go for unanimous consent to approve this Constitution. What we want is 9 out of the 13 states to approve it, and then the Constitution will indeed be the governing law of the land. Now, the Federalists, they are supporters of the new Constitution. The Anti-Federalists remained opposed, and the primary reason they remain opposed is due to concerns over civil liberties. They are concerned about the rights of citizens in this new Constitution. They want to make sure that people have the power within the United States with this new, stronger central government that is being created. So, the Federalists are going to favor the new Constitution's balance of power between the states and the national government. They agree with it. They think it's a good plan. They think that while the Constitution has given a stronger or provided a stronger central government, that it has also created a balance of power between the states and therefore individual citizens as well. So they think the plan is a good one. Anti-Federalists are opposing it because they think the central government is too strong. These are people who are okay with the Articles of Confederation, did not expect a brand new constitution to be created. They just expected the Articles to be revised, fix some things, and then still make it so that the states had the primary say in the organization of the United States government. They feel that the new federal government is much too powerful. They would like to see an addition of a Bill of Rights, and this will be key to ratification. So who are the Federalists? We can't mention all of them, of course, but let's mention their leaders. There are 3 main leaders of the Federalist Party in this time period. James Madison, pictured here, who will go on to be the 4th President of the United States and one of the primary authors of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, who will serve under George Washington as the first Secretary of State and come up really with much of our plan of government and our economic system as it still currently exists. And then we have John Jay, who will go on to be our first Supreme Court Justice. What these 3 men do is they write the Federalist Papers. This is a series of papers or articles, essays, that will be published in papers across the country in support of federalism, or the new Constitution as it's been created. And they feel that the stronger central government was superior to the weak one provided by the Articles of Confederation. They feel that a new Constitution had to be created because the Articles of Confederation had so many problems. Now, what is federalism? Federalism quite simply means division of power. In this case, 3 separate branches at 3 different levels of government. So what the Founding Fathers did with the Constitution was they created 3 separate branches of government and 3 levels of government. And at each of those levels of government are those 3 branches. Each of those branches has checks and balances on the other branches. Those 3 branches are, as I'm sure you've heard of by now, the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The legislative branch makes laws, the executive enforces them, and the judicial branch, made up of our court systems, interprets them. And then we have our 3 levels: national, sometimes called federal, state, and local. So we've got these 3 branches, at each of these three levels of government. The national level has these three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The state does, and the local government does. Okay, there are people opposed to this system. These are the Anti-Federalists, as I mentioned previously. Some prominent leaders of the Anti-Federalists include Patrick Henry, who is best remembered for a famous quote during the American Revolution of "Give me liberty or give me death." We also have George Mason, and then Richard Henry Lee, who I believe is a relative of Robert E. Lee, who you've probably heard of. All three of these people are from the South, and they are more concerned about state rights as opposed to federal government rights. They were concerned that there was no guarantee that protected the rights of the people. So once again, to them, an addition of a Bill of Rights is key to ratification. Okay, so let's look at the ratification process. Delaware becomes the first state to ratify. For many years, and perhaps even still, if you see a Delaware license plate, often the slogan on it is "First State." That's because they were the first state to ratify or approve of the United States Constitution. New Hampshire will be the ninth, and that'll happen on June 21st, 1788. So once New Hampshire ratifies the Constitution, 9 of the 13 states have done so, and the Constitution has officially become the law of the land. But it would be nice if all states did, because that might prevent any resistance by those states in adhering to the laws of the Constitution. So what we see is after New Hampshire being the ninth, the key states of Virginia and New York follow. Now the reason why Virginia and New York are such key states in this ratification process is they are the most populated states of the country at that time. So it's very key that the Constitution gets their approval due to their large population, but also how important these states are for the overall economy of the country. They're very economically powerful states. And then Rhode Island. Rhode Island has always kind of had a reputation of being a rebel state, always kind of wanting to do its own thing. So they adhered to that by being the last state to ratify on May 29th, 1790. And some of that may have been due to the fact that they're one of the smaller states. And even with the compromises that you'll see come about in the Constitution, such as the Great Compromise, Rhode Island felt that there was still too much power in the southern states and some of the larger states, so that's why they held out as long as they did. But eventually, by 1790, every state has ratified the new U.S. Constitution that currently governs the United States of America. Okay, now I mentioned a Bill of Rights was key to approval, and the Constitution would not have gone through or been ratified by all of the 13 states for sure, if not for a Bill of Rights being added to the Constitution. Now, the Bill of Rights is defined as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Sometimes students mix this up and they think of the Bill of Rights as separate from the Constitution. It is part of the Constitution. It is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Now, an amendment is a change or a revision to the Constitution. When the Founding Fathers created the Constitution, they created the ability to amend it or change it. They knew that in order for the Constitution to last, you had to have the ability for it to respond to changing times. And that's what the amendment process is for. Sometimes there are new amendments to be added in response to what's going on in particular time periods. Now, currently, there are 27 amendments in the Constitution, so that tells us that there have been 17 added since the Bill of Rights was added. But let's take a look at the Bill of Rights as we close out this lecture today. So there are 10 of them, right? The first is sometimes considered to be the most important. You could debate which one is the most important, of course, but there's a lot in the First Amendment. Freedom of religion, speech, press, and political activity, all of that is in the First Amendment. And that is incredibly important to our rights as citizens. The ability to express our own opinions, the ability to champion causes that we think are important, and the ability to check power. What's awesome about the First Amendment and why these rights should not be too restricted, they are restricted some, they can't be unlimited, but we want to prevent too much restriction of these rights because it is a check on tyrannical power. It checks the power of the President and Congress. It keeps them from becoming tyrannical, or at least we hope. That is the purpose behind them. The Second Amendment deals with the right to bear arms. So this is the right of the citizens to arm themselves, to have weapons, guns, right? This amendment has come under much debate in recent years due to the degree of mass shootings and degree of gun violence that takes place in our country. So it has been a much debated amendment. And really the key to the debate is a well-regulated militia. So we've seen that term well-regulated, meaning the founding fathers were okay with regulating this right. All rights are regulated. But then, of course, there's also the wording that this right shall not be infringed. So this language, well-regulated and shall not be infringed, that is the key language of the amendment that causes so much debate. And of course, the weapons at the time period weren't as powerful as the weapons of today, so that factors in the debate as well. But interesting debates, interesting arguments on either side for that particular amendment. The Third Amendment, not necessarily too relevant in our current time period, very relevant during revolutionary times. The Third Amendment deals with housing of troops in private homes in peacetime. This was something that was forced upon American colonists during the American Revolution time period, and they had to house and feed these troops, and troops could be abusive to the families at times. And so this was an important amendment at the time period, and I guess it still has some relevance now. We don't want the government necessarily to force us to house troops if we had to, right? Definitely not as relevant now. You can make the argument for that, but very relevant in that time period. The Fourth Amendment deals with the prevention of the search of citizens' homes without proper warrant, so it's protection against illegal search and seizure. I put this picture on here because I thought this maybe reflected our more modern times with this issue. How much can the government, as represented here in a policeman-like figure, how much can the government regulate or watch or observe what we do on the internet? I think that's a key issue now. There are programs in place where the government monitors what citizens do on the internet, looking for so-called terrorists or security threats, but there's some debate as to how much degree that should occur because we don't want our privacy to be interfered with. 5 through 8, I kind of lump those together because those are all kind of lumped together in terms of defending the rights of those accused of a crime. Basically what those amendments do is they guarantee fair treatment for individuals accused of crime. 8 is big here, and 8 is maybe the one that's easiest to remember here because that deals with cruel and unusual punishment. The United States forbids that as a form of legal enforcement. In other words, we're not supposed to torture people who have been accused of a crime. This political cartoon came out a few years back now, dealing with U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, in which it says our torture is not as bad as their torture. We've come under criticism for torturing some people suspected of being terrorists because, once again, that may be a violation of Amendment 8, and then there's debate whether or not that just applies to U.S. citizens. There's debate as to how effective torture is anyway in getting information out because people tend to just say what they think they want their torturers to hear when they're getting tortured. So this is another issue that is heavily debated in our country as to whether or not the U.S. should use torture at all. And then 9 and 10. And 9 and 10 deal with imposing general limits on the powers of the federal government. Basically, these two amendments deal with delegating powers to the states. If you look at the wording of Amendment 10 here, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So there are powers in place that governments carry out that the federal government does not get involved in. Those powers are reserved to the states and local governments to carry out some of those things. Like a big issue right now is voting laws. It used to be that states regulated voting laws, but then there was a lot of discrimination in place when they did so. So the federal government took a larger role in regulating voting laws. Recently, the federal government role has been lessened in voting laws, and we've seen some incidences of voter suppression occurring again. So these are, once again, very relevant current issues. Very important that our right to vote should be protected. Okay, some closing slides here, just dealing with a little bit more of the story. So the original application, so who was subject to the laws or the Bill of Rights of the Constitution initially? Well, initially the Bill of Rights was pretty exclusive. Really the only people protected completely from the Bill of Rights were white males with property. Native Americans, slaves, free blacks, and women were originally excluded from Bill of Rights protections. So it is through much protest and effort over the years that these people have fallen under the Bill of Rights umbrella, and there's still some concern as to whether or not these rights are equally applied, as we still see civil rights occurring today, particularly in the year 2020. These issues remain. Continuing relevance. The United States Constitution is not a large constitution by any means. There are countries with much bigger documents, but it is the oldest written national constitution still in use. Other countries have had to abandon their original constitutions. Ours is a great plan, and it was very well written, and it is a living document. Now, what I mean by that is through the amendment process and the necessary and proper clause, the Constitution can respond to the times, and therefore it's flexible, and that may be the very good reason as to why it continues to last and why we continue to revere it so much, because it can respond to the times. There was a time in this country when slavery was legal. There was a time in this country when women couldn't vote. People thought that was unfair. It is unfair. Those are cruel laws. It's not fair to those groups of people. And so the Constitution responded with amendments to make changes over time, and those things still occur. But that's why it lasts. It's a living document. It's a breathing document. It can respond to our times, and hopefully will continue to do so for many, many years. One of the things that I mentioned that helps it respond to the times is Article 1, Section 8. The amendment process helps it respond to the times. We can add another amendment if needed, but also the elastic clause allows the Constitution to respond to the times. The elastic clause is part of Article 1, Section 8. It gives Congress the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying out its functions. Now, sometimes people are concerned that this clause gives the federal government too much power, but the Founding Fathers put this in the Constitution because they believed that there are going to be things that are going to come up that Congress is going to need to respond to that they can't foresee. Once again, the times are going to change, and so the Congress has to be able to create laws. And if you ever watch Congress on C-SPAN or whatever, or your teacher shows you a video clip of Congress or tells you about it, every day laws are being proposed in Congress that are debated, redebated, voted upon, voted down, come up again. Every day laws are being determined in Congress as to whether or not they should be passed to try to improve our country and hopefully make it a better democracy. Not every law passed, of course, does that. There are some laws that maybe go against that, but the purpose of that is to create laws that hopefully help us fulfill the values of our creed. Okay, the amendment process. I usually require kids to remember this, and it comes up often in written response, kids, so try to get this down. Once again, the amendment process is a change or addition to the Constitution. An amendment is a change or addition, so it's a revision of the Constitution. It's not easy to do. You need 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. That rarely happens. You often get just simple majorities on bills. It's hard to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress to agree on anything. It can happen, and it does happen, but not much. That is a difficult fraction to reach. Once it gets through both houses of Congress, then the amendment goes to states for approval, and it takes 3/4 ratification by the states in order for it to do so. Currently, we have 50 states in the United States, so you need 38 to approve an amendment that has been proposed to the Constitution. Once again, not easy to do. An amendment that is continually up for debate in our country is the Equal Rights Amendment, which applies to women. That has not yet been added to the Constitution. It came up one vote short in the year in which it had to be approved. Since then, more states have approved it, but Congress won't bring it up for debate again. If Congress ever does bring the Equal Rights Amendment up for debate again, it may very well be ratified, as other states have expressed that they would like to do so. We shall see what happens in the future. And once again, we have 27 amendments that have been added to the Constitution since the late 1700s. The first 10, of course, were the Bill of Rights, and then we've added 17 since then. Thank you for your attention. Please make sure you post a key question or comment in response to this lecture.